close your eyes and let the world fade away. Imagine a time long before cities, before clocks, before the endless noise of today. We are going back to the very beginning, to a moment when the night was dark and the fire was the only light. This is the story of a man who looked at the crowd and chose silence. The story of the very first rebel. If you too are tired of the modern noise, if you lie awake seeking a quiet place to rest, then you have found your sanctuary. You are a sleepless rebel too. Make this campfire your nightly home. Join our tribe by subscribing so you never have to face the dark alone again. Now, take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. The journey begins. The air inside the great shelter was thick. It was heavy with the scent of wood smoke and the warmth of too many bodies pressed close together. It was the time of the long winter. The tribe had gathered deep inside the rock hollows, hiding from the biting wind that howled across the frozen plains outside. Here inside it was safe. Here it was warm. But for him, it was not peaceful. He sat near the edge of the fire pit. The embers were glowing a deep, dying red, pulsing slowly like the heartbeat of a sleeping beast. Around him, the tribe slept. Dozens of them, men, women, and children, huddled in piles of fur and dried grass. They were a tangle of limbs and heavy breaths. The sound of their sleeping filled the cavern. It was a symphony of human noise, deep snores, soft whistles of breath, the shifting of weight on dry leaves. To anyone else, this sound was comfort. It meant survival. It meant you were not alone in the vast, dangerous world. But to him, tonight, it sounded like a cage. He shifted his weight on the hard ground. The fur beneath him was old and worn. It scratched against his skin, a constant reminder of where he was. He looked at the faces illuminated by the faint orange glow of the embers. They looked content. They looked settled. They had found their place in the circle, tight and secure, but he felt a strange distance growing in his chest. A distance that had started as a whisper many moons ago and was now a roar in his mind. He was part of them, but he was no longer with them. He watched a thin trail of gray smoke rise from the fire. It twisted and turned, trying to find the small crack in the ceiling of the cave, trying to escape into the open sky. He envied the smoke. It knew where it wanted to go. It wanted to be out there. Out in the vast, cold emptiness. The noise of the tribe seemed to grow louder in the silence of his mind. A child whimpered in its sleep. A man coughed, a dry, hacking sound that echoed off the damp stone walls. Someone muttered a few words in a dream, nonsense words that hung in the stagnant air. He closed his eyes, trying to block it out. He tried to find a quiet space inside his own head, but the presence of so many others pressed against him. Their heat, their smell, their noise. It was suffocating. He remembered a time years ago when the tribe was smaller, when the nights were quieter, but now they were many. The cave felt shrunken. The air felt used. Every breath he took felt like it had already been breathed by someone else. He craved air that was sharp and new. He craved a silence that was absolute. He opened his eyes and looked toward the entrance of the cave. It was a wide, jagged mouth leading to the outside world. Beyond that opening, there was only darkness, a deep blue-black darkness that swallowed everything. Most of his people feared that darkness. They believed that demons and monsters lived in the shadows beyond the firelight. They believed that to step away from the tribe was to step into death. That was the law. You stay together, you stay where it is warm, you stay where it is loud. But as he stared at the darkness, he did not feel fear. He felt a pull, a magnetic pull in the center of his chest. The darkness did not look empty to him. It looked like space. It looked like room to breathe. It looked like a canvas waiting for a thought that wasn't interrupted by another person's voice. He picked up a small stone from the ground. It was smooth, polished by the river, cool to the touch. He turned it over and over in his hand. The repetitive motion was soothing. Around him, the rhythm of the tribe continued. Inhale, exhale, snore, shift. It was a cycle that never ended, day after day, night after night. They hunted together, they ate together, they slept together. There was never a moment, not a single heartbeat of time, where a man could simply be. Just be. He wondered if something was wrong with him. Why could he not find comfort in the safety of the pack? Why did the warmth of the fire feel like a fever? Why did the voices of his kin feel like the buzzing of flies? Perhaps he was broken. Or perhaps he was simply the first to wake up. He looked at his hands. They were strong, rough, capable of making fire, capable of building shelter, capable of finding food. He realized then that he did not need the tribe to survive the night. The tribe needed the tribe. But he was different. The thought was terrifying, but also exhilarating. It was a spark, brighter than the embers fading at his feet. The air in the cave grew heavier as the night deepened. The smell of roasted meat from the evening meal still lingered, mixed with the scent of drying animal hides. It was a thick, oily smell that coated the back of his throat. He swallowed, trying to clear it, but the taste remained. He needed water, not the warm, muddy water from the skin bags they kept near the fire. He needed the water from the river source, ice cold, clear, running over rocks under the light of the moon. He slowly extended his legs, stretching the stiffness from his muscles. His joints cracked softly, a small sound lost in the cacophony of the sleepers. He looked at the man sleeping next to him. It was his brother. A good man, a strong hunter. His brother slept with his mouth slightly open, one arm thrown over his eyes to block out the firelight. He looked peaceful. He belonged here. They all belonged here. The protagonist looked back at the cave entrance. The wind outside had changed. The howling had stopped. Now, there was just a low, steady breeze. It whispered across the stones at the mouth of the cave. It sounded like a voice. A very old, very quiet voice calling his name. Not his name given by the tribe, but his true name. The name of his spirit. He knew he could not stay another night. If he stayed, the noise would crush him. If he stayed, the suffocation would snuff out the little flame that was burning inside his soul. He had to go. Not tomorrow. Not when the sun rose. Now, while the world was asleep, while the judgment of others was suspended in dreams, he began to move. Very slowly. He did not stand up yet. He simply shifted his position, preparing his body. He reached out and touched his pile of belongings. A thick fur cloak, made from the hide of a great bear. A spear with a tip of sharpened flint. A small leather pouch containing his fire-starting stones. These were the only things he owned. These were the only things he needed. He ran his fingers through the fur of the cloak. It was coarse and thick. It would be his house. It would be his shelter. He gripped the smooth wood of the spear shaft. It would be his protector. He felt the weight of the pouch. It would be his life. The decision settled over him like a blanket. It was heavy, but it was comforting. There was no going back once he stepped out into the cold. The tribe would not understand. They would think he was lost or mad. They might even search for him for a day or two, but eventually they would stop. They would return to the fire, to the safety, to the noise, and he would be gone. He would be a memory, a story told to children to warn them of the dangers of wandering off. But they would be wrong. He was not wandering off to be lost. He was wandering off to be found. He took a deep breath, filling his lungs with the smoky air for the last time. He held it for a moment, tasting the safety, tasting the confinement. Then he exhaled slowly. He let it all go. The obligation, the expectation, the noise. He rose to a crouch. His movements were silent, practiced. He was a hunter, after all. He knew how to move without disturbing the grass. He knew how to breathe without making a sound. He gathered his cloak and draped it over his shoulders. The weight of it felt good. It felt like armor. He picked up his spear. He tied the pouch to his belt. He looked around the circle one last time. He looked at the elders, the mothers, the warriors. He felt a pang of sadness, sharp and sudden. He loved them. In his own way, he loved them. But he could not be them. He offered a silent wish for their safety. May your fire stay warm. May your bellies remain full. May your sleep be heavy. Then he turned his back on the fire. He took the first step away from the light, then the second. The shadows lengthened across the floor as he moved away from the center. The further he walked, the cooler the air became. The smell of smoke began to fade, replaced by the crisp, clean scent of snow and pine. The snoring grew quieter. The heavy atmosphere lifted with every yard he put between himself and the circle. He reached the mouth of the cave. The transition point. The threshold between the known and the unknown. He paused there, standing on the edge of the world. The cold air hit his face like a slap, waking him up, making his skin tingle. It was freezing, yes, but it was real. He looked up. The sky was not black. It was a deep, endless indigo, scattered with 1,000,000 stars. They were bright and sharp, staring down at him with cold indifference. There was no roof here to hide them. There were no walls to block the wind. He took a step out onto the ledge. The snow crunched softly beneath his feet, a sound that was his alone. No one else heard it. Just him and the night. He filled his lungs with the icy air. It burned, but it was a good burn. It cleansed him. He was outside. He was alone. And for the first time in his life, the silence was not empty. It was full. It was waiting. He tightened his grip on his spear, pulled his bear cloak tighter around his neck, and began to walk into the dark. The first rebel had left the fire. The journey into the silence had begun. The cold was a living thing. It did not just touch the skin. It pressed against it, firm and undeniable. As he walked away from the cave, the air felt sharper with every step. Behind him, the faint orange glow of the tribe's fire was fading. It was becoming a small, distant star on the earth, growing smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed it completely. He did not look back. To look back was to invite doubt. To look back was to remember the warmth he had left behind. Instead, he kept his eyes on the ground before him. The snow was pale and luminous under the starlight. It covered the world in a blanket of silence. His feet found a rhythm. Crunch, step, crunch, step. It was the only sound in the entire world. For the first time in his life, he could hear the sound of his own movement without it being lost in the shuffle of others. He could hear the leather of his boots shifting. He could hear the soft rustle of the bear fur against his neck. He could hear the air rushing in and out of his nose. It was a strange, intimate music, the music of solitude. The landscape was vast. Great shadows of trees stretched out across the snow like sleeping giants. They were ancient pines, their branches heavy with white powder. They stood perfectly still, as if they were holding their breath, watching this lone figure move through their domain. He walked between them, feeling small. In the cave, amidst the tribe, he had felt large, cramped, taking up too much space. Here, under the open sky, he was just a speck, a tiny, moving point of heat in a world of ice. But he did not feel insignificant. He felt free. The path he chose was not a path at all. It was simply the way forward. He followed the decline of the hill, moving toward the valley where the wind would be less harsh. The ground was uneven, hidden beneath the snow, but his legs were strong. They remembered the terrain. He moved with a steady, conserving energy. He did not run. There was no need to run. There was nowhere to be. There was no one waiting for him. Time had stopped mattering. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. In the dark, time is fluid. It stretches and compresses. He walked until his legs began to burn with a dull, pleasant ache. The cold had seeped into the outer layers of his fur cloak, but inside, his body heat was trapped, creating a cocoon of warmth. He felt like a walking ember. He stopped near a large boulder to catch his breath. He leaned his back against the cold stone and looked up. The sky was changing. The deep, ink-black darkness was slowly, very slowly, turning into a bruised purple. The stars were blinking out, one by one, retiring for the night. The moon was low on the horizon, a pale sliver of bone retreating behind the mountains. He waited. Standing there in the absolute stillness, he waited for the world to wake up. Usually, at this time, the cave would be stirring. The sound of coughing would start. The babies would cry for milk. The men would be sharpening their spears, talking loudly about the hunt. The chaos of the morning routine would be beginning. But here, there was nothing. No noise, just the wind sighing through the pine needles. Shh. Shh. Then it happened. The first sign. A single bird chirped, a high, clear note that cut through the cold air like a silver needle. It was somewhere high in the branches above him. It chirped again. Then, silence. It was not a call of alarm. It was a greeting, a simple acknowledgement that the night was ending. He smiled. His lips cracked slightly in the cold, but he smiled. He had never truly listened to a single bird before. In the tribe, birds were just background noise, or they were food. But here, this bird was his companion. It was the only other witness to this new day. The purple in the sky lightened to a soft, dusty blue. Then, a faint ribbon of gray appeared on the eastern horizon. The gray turned to pink. The pink deepened into a soft, burning gold. The sun was coming. He watched the light creep across the land. It touched the tops of the highest mountains first, painting the snow in shades of rose and amber. Then it moved down the slopes, touching the tops of the trees. The shadows on the ground began to retreat, shrinking back towards the west. The world was revealing itself to him. It was a slow, majestic unveiling. The gray shapes became trees with green needles. The dark patches became rocks with lichen and moss. The white floor became a texture of drifts and ripples. Everything was sharp. Everything was clear. When the first direct ray of the sun hit his face, he closed his eyes. He felt the sudden, gentle warmth on his cheeks. It was different from the fire. The fire was hot and smoky and fierce. The sun was clean. It was a pure, radiant heat that seemed to penetrate through his skin and warm his very bones. He took a deep breath of the morning air. It tasted of pine resin and cold water. It was the freshest thing he had ever tasted. He pushed himself off the boulder and looked around. He was alone. Truly, completely alone. For a moment, the old instinct of fear tried to rise up, the instinct that said a man alone is a dead man. But he pushed it down. He looked at his hands. He looked at the spear. He looked at the endless forest waiting for him. He realized then that he was not just surviving. He was living. The silence was not empty. It was a container for his own thoughts. For the first time, his mind was quiet. The roar of the tribe was gone. The pressure was gone. There was only the step he was about to take, and the breath he was currently taking. He adjusted the bear cloak on his shoulders. The sun was fully up now, a blinding white disk in a sea of blue. The day had begun, his first day. He began to walk again. His destination was the river. He could not see it yet, but he could smell the water in the air. He walked with a lighter step now. The darkness was behind him. The fear of the night had vanished with the shadows. He found himself noticing the smallest things, the way the frost clung to the tips of the dried grass, looking like tiny diamonds. The way a squirrel moved silently along a branch, twitching its tail. The pattern of deer tracks crossing his path. The world was full of details he had missed while he was busy listening to the noise of men. He felt a deep, heavy tiredness settling into his muscles, but it was a good tiredness. It was not the exhaustion of stress or the weariness of enduring others. It was the honest fatigue of using his body. He knew that when he slept tonight, his sleep would be deep. It would be black and dreamless. But not yet. He walked on, bathed in the golden light of the morning. He was the king of this silent kingdom. He was the first rebel, and this quiet, frozen world was his reward. He walked on, deeper into the peace, step by slow, deliberate step. The sun was now high enough to cast short shadows under the trees. The air had warmed slightly, just enough to soften the bite of the frost, but the world remained crisp and still. He continued his walk, guided not by a map, but by a sound. At first it was just a whisper, a low, steady hum beneath the silence of the forest. As he walked further, the sound grew distinct. It was a rushing sound, a churning, ceaseless rhythm. It was the river. In the cave, water was something that was brought in. It was carried in heavy skins, sloshing and warm, tasting of leather and many hands. It was rationed. It was guarded. But out here, the water was free. It belonged to no one, and therefore, it belonged to him. He moved through a thicket of pine trees, their needles brushing softly against his bare cloak. The ground began to slope downward, the earth becoming softer, damper. The smell of pine changed to the smell of wet stone and moss. It was an earthy, deep scent, the scent of life. He pushed aside a heavy branch and stepped out onto the riverbank. The sight took his breath away. The river was wide and powerful. It cut through the valley like a vein of liquid silver. The water was not frozen, though banks of ice clung to the edges. It flowed fast and clear, rushing over smooth gray stones, creating white foam that danced and vanished in seconds. The sound was magnificent. It was louder than the wind. It was a constant, heavy roar. But unlike the noise of the tribe, this noise was not chaotic. It was consistent. It had a pattern. Rush and flow. Rush and flow. It was a sound that could lull a man to sleep. It was a sound that washed away thoughts. He walked to the edge of the water. The stones beneath his boots were round and slippery, polished by centuries of current. He moved carefully, finding his balance. He reached a spot where a large, flat rock extended out into the stream. He stepped onto it and sat down. For a long moment, he just watched the water. He watched leaves floating by, traveling from places he had never seen to places he would never go. He watched the way the sunlight hit the ripples, creating flashes of brilliance that dazzled his eyes. He felt a dryness in his throat. He realized he had not drunk since the night before. He placed his spear on the rock beside him. He adjusted his cloak. Then, he leaned forward, bracing his hands on the cold stone, and lowered his face to the water. He did not use a cup. He did not use a bowl. He drank as the wolf drinks. He drank as the deer drinks. The water was shockingly cold. It hit his lips and teeth with a sharp ache. But it was wonderful. It was pure. It tasted of melted snow and high mountains. He took a long, deep swallow. He could feel the cold liquid traveling down his throat, cooling his chest, settling in his stomach. It woke up every nerve in his body. He drank again and again, washing away the taste of smoke, washing away the dust of the cave. With every swallow he felt lighter, He was drinking the essence of the wild. He sat back up and wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He took a deep breath, blowing out a cloud of white mist. He felt satisfied. It was such a simple thing, to be thirsty and to drink. In the tribe, everything was complicated. Everything came with a conversation or a trade or a rule. Here the need arose and the earth provided. There was no middleman. He looked at his reflection in a calmer pool of water near the bank. The face staring back at him was familiar, yet different. His hair was windblown. His eyes were bright. The tension that usually held his jaw tight was gone. He looked like a man who had remembered who he was. He decided to rest here for a while. The sound of the river was hypnotic. He pulled his knees to his chest and wrapped his arms around them, cocooning himself in the bear fur. The sun was warm on his back. The rock was solid beneath him. The water rushed on, endless and tireless. He closed his eyes. He let his other senses take over. He listened to the splash of water against the rock. He listened to the wind rustling the dry reeds on the far bank. He felt the vibration of the river through the stone he sat on. It was a gentle trembling, a reminder of the power flowing just inches away. His mind began to drift. He thought about the river's journey. It started somewhere high up, maybe from a glacier, a single drop joining another. Then it grew, gathering strength, pushing past obstacles, never stopping, never looking back. It just moved forward, always forward. He felt a kinship with the river. He, too, had broken away. He, too, was moving forward. He did not know where he would end up. Maybe a great ocean, maybe a quiet lake. It did not matter. The moving was the important part. The heaviness of his eyelids returned. The walk had been long, and the emotional weight of leaving had taken its toll. He allowed himself to doze, just for a moment. He sat there, a lone figure by the rushing water, suspended in a state between waking and sleeping. In this half-sleep, the roar of the river became a voice. It whispered to him that he was safe. It whispered that the world was big enough to hold him. It whispered that he did not need to perform or explain or defend. He just needed to breathe. Inhale, the smell of cold water. Exhale, the release of old burdens. He sat there for a long time as the sun moved slowly across the sky, shifting the shadows on the riverbank. He was perfectly still, a statue of peace carved from flesh and fur. He was learning the art of doing nothing, the art of simply existing. When he finally opened his eyes, the light had changed again. It was afternoon now. The gold had turned to a softer, hazier yellow. The air was getting cooler again. It was time to move. He needed to find a place for the night, a place to build his own fire, a fire that would be small and quiet and his alone. He stood up, his joints stiff but strong. He picked up his spear. He looked at the river one last time, silently thanking it for the water and the song. He turned his face toward the forest on the other side of the bank. The trees there looked thick and sheltering. That is where he would go. He began to walk along the bank, looking for a place to cross. His steps were slow and measured. He was in no rush. The night would come when it came, and he would be ready. He was the rebel, he was the wanderer, and he was finally, truly awake. He walked along the riverbank for some time, his eyes scanning the water. The river was wide here and deep. The current was strong, muscular coils of water twisting over themselves. To cross here would be foolish. The tribe had always taught him to fear the deep water, to fear the things that could pull a man down. But he did not feel fear. He felt a calm calculation. He was not fighting the river. He was asking it for passage. A mile downstream, the river widened further, and the roar softened to a chatter. Here, the water was shallow. Large gray stones poked their heads above the surface like the backs of sleeping turtles. This was the place, the bridge made by nature. He stood at the edge of the gravel bar. He adjusted the bear cloak, pulling it higher on his shoulders to keep it clear of the spray. He tightened the straps of his boots. He gripped his spear firmly, using it as a third leg, a stabilizer against the push of the current. He took the first step. The water rushed around his ankles. Even through the leather of his boots, he felt the immediate clamp of the cold. It was a sharp biting sensation that traveled up his legs. But he did not pull back. He breathed into the cold. He accepted it. It was real. It was the feeling of being alive. He took another step, then another. He moved slowly, testing each stone before trusting it with his weight. Some stones were slippery with green moss, treacherous and slick. Others were loose, shifting under his foot. He had to be entirely present. He could not think about the past. He could not worry about the future. His entire world narrowed down to the next step, the next stone, the next breath. In the middle of the river, the sound was all-consuming. It filled his ears, drowning out the wind, drowning out the birds. There was only the water. It pushed against his calves, urging him downstream, testing his resolve. He planted his spear against the riverbed, leaning into the wood. He was a statue in the stream, a point of stillness in a world of motion. He looked down. The water was clear as glass. He could see small fish darting in the shadows of the rocks. They moved effortlessly, masters of the current. He watched them for a moment, admiring their grace. They did not struggle. They flowed. He tried to mimic them in his mind. Do not fight the current, he told himself. Work with it. He moved forward again. Step, balance, breathe. Step, balance, breathe. The water began to recede. It dropped from his calves to his ankles. The roar behind him began to fade. He was reaching the other side. When his boot crunched onto the dry rocks of the far bank, he let out a long exhale. He had done it. He had crossed the boundary. The river was now a wall of water between him and the tribe. He was on the wild side, the side where the rules of men did not apply. He walked up the bank, away from the damp air of the river, and toward the trees. These trees were different from the ones near the cave. These were older, massive oaks and towering pines that blocked out the sky. Their trunks were as wide as boulders, covered in thick, rough bark. He stepped into the shadow of the forest. The light changed instantly. The bright, harsh sunlight of the riverbank was replaced by a soft, dappled gloom. It was like stepping into a great hall. The air here was still and silent. It smelled of pine needles, damp earth, and decaying leaves. It was a rich, heavy scent that filled his nose and settled deep in his chest. The ground beneath his feet was soft. Layers upon layers of fallen needles and leaves created a natural carpet. His footsteps made no sound. He moved like a ghost. He walked deeper into the woods. The trees stood like pillars, holding up a roof of green branches. Shafts of sunlight pierced through the canopy here and there, illuminating floating specks of dust. It was beautiful. It was solemn. It felt holy. He felt a deep sense of protection here. The open sky made him feel exposed, watched. But here, the trees hid him. They embraced him. He ran his hand along the rough bark of a pine tree as he passed. It felt solid and ancient. This tree had stood here long before he was born, and it would stand here long after he was gone. There was comfort in that. He was tired now. The excitement of the crossing had faded, leaving a heavy, warm fatigue in his limbs. He needed to find a place to rest for the night, a place that was dry and sheltered. He scanned the forest floor. He was looking for a hollow, a space between the roots of a great tree or a small overhang of rock. He moved slowly, his eyes half closed, trusting his instincts. He found it near a cluster of ferns. A massive oak tree had fallen years ago, its roots ripped from the earth, creating a natural wall of wood and dirt. Over time, smaller bushes had grown over it, creating a cozy, cave-like nook. It was dry. It was protected from the wind. It was perfect. He walked over to it and peered inside. The ground was covered in dry leaves. He used his spear to poke around, checking for snakes or other animals. It was empty. It was waiting for him. He crawled inside. The space was small, just big enough for him to curl up. It smelled of earth and old wood. He took off his bear cloak and spread it out on the leaves. He sat down on the soft fur, leaning his back against the trunk of the fallen tree. He was safe. He looked out from his little shelter. He could see the forest stretching out before him, a maze of shadows and light. He could hear the distant, rhythmic sound of the river he had just crossed. It was a soothing background hum. He did not build a fire yet. He did not need one. The afternoon was still warm enough, and he enjoyed the dim light of the woods. He just wanted to sit, to feel the earth beneath him, to know that for the first time in his life, he was truly home. Not a home made of stone and noise, but a home made of silence and wood. He rested his head on his knees. His eyes grew heavy. He watched a single leaf detach from a branch high above. It floated down, twisting and turning in the slow air, taking its time to reach the ground. He watched it fall. Down, 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 until it landed softly on the forest floor. He was like that leaf. He had let go of the branch. He was floating. And now he had landed. He sat in the shelter of the fallen oak for a long time. The forest breathed around him, a slow inhalation of wind and a soft exhalation of rustling leaves. As the afternoon deepened, he felt a shifting within himself. It was a hollow feeling, low in his belly. It was hunger. In the tribe, hunger was a noisy thing. It was a cause for argument. It was a reason to shout, to demand, to worry. But here, alone in the quiet woods, hunger felt different. It was simply a signal, a gentle reminder from his body that he was alive and that he needed fuel. It was not a panic. It was a purpose. He crawled out from his nook. The light in the forest was turning gold and syrup thick. The sun was dipping lower, casting long, stretching shadows between the tree trunks. He stood up and brushed the dried leaves from his knees. He picked up his spear, not to kill, but to use as a walking stick, a companion for his hands. He began to walk slowly through the undergrowth. He moved with his eyes cast down, scanning the forest floor. He was not looking for the tracks of a deer or the sign of a boar. He did not want the noise of the hunt tonight. He did not want the smell of blood. He wanted something simple, something the earth offered freely. He walked past towering pine trees and clusters of ferns that brushed against his thighs like soft green feathers. He breathed in the air. It smelled of damp soil and mushrooms. It was the smell of growth. After a few minutes, he found what he was looking for. A patch of brambles grew wild against a rocky outcrop. The vines were tangled and thick, covered in small, sharp thorns that guarded their treasure. But amongst the green and brown leaves, he saw them. Dark, swollen shapes, blackberries. They were ripe, heavy with juice, hanging low on the stems, waiting to be found. He approached the bush carefully. He did not rush. He reached out a hand, his fingers moving with precision to avoid the thorns. He touched a berry. It was soft and cool to the touch. It felt fragile, like a small bubble of water held together by a thin skin. He plucked it. The stem gave way easily. There was no resistance. He lifted the berry to his mouth. He placed it on his tongue and closed his eyes. He bit down. The flavor exploded in his mouth. It was sweet, darker than honey, with a tiny, sharp tartness at the end that made his jaw tingle. It tasted of the sun and the rain and the earth. It was intense. In the cave, food was often old, dried meat that tasted like dust, roots that had been stored for too long. But this was fresh. It was alive. He ate another and another. His movements were rhythmic. Reach, pluck, eat. Reach, pluck, eat. He did not shovel the food into his mouth. He savored each one. He noticed the texture of the tiny seeds. He noticed the way the juice stained his fingertips a deep purple. He felt the sugar entering his blood, waking up his mind, giving strength to his limbs. He ate until the hollow feeling in his belly was gone. He did not take more than he needed. He did not hoard. The bush was still full of fruit. He left them for the birds. He left them for the bears. He left them for tomorrow. He turned away from the brambles and continued his slow walk. A little further on, beneath a grove of hazel trees, he found the ground littered with small, hard nuts. They had fallen from the branches, hidden amongst the brown leaves. He knelt down. The dampness of the earth soaked into his trousers, cooling his knees. He sifted through the leaves with his hands. It was like searching for treasure. His fingers brushed against the smooth, hard shells. He gathered a handful. He sat back on his heels. He took 2 stones from the ground. He placed a nut on the larger stone and used the smaller one to crack it open. Crack. The sound was sharp and brief in the quiet woods. He peeled away the broken shell. Inside was the kernel, pale white and firm. He ate the nut. It was crunchy and rich. It tasted of oil and wood. It was a solid, grounding food. It felt substantial in his stomach. Crack, peel, eat. The rhythm was soothing. He sat there for a long time, just a man sitting on the forest floor, eating nuts as the sun went down. There was no conversation to make. There was no one to impress. There was no one to judge how he ate or how much he ate. He was simply an animal in the ecosystem, feeding himself. A squirrel ran down the trunk of the hazel tree. It stopped a few feet away, its tail twitching, watching him with black, bead-like eyes. He stopped chewing. He watched the squirrel. For a moment they just looked at each other. 2 creatures of the forest. Then he tossed a shelled nut toward the squirrel. The animal grabbed it and darted back up the tree. He smiled. A genuine, unforced smile. He felt a connection. He was not an intruder here. He was a guest, and the forest was a generous host. He dusted the shell fragments from his hands. He felt full. He felt satisfied. It was a different kind of fullness than the one he felt after a feast in the tribe. That fullness often came with heaviness and sleepiness. This fullness came with clarity. He felt light. He felt clean. He stood up. The light was fading fast now. The shadows were merging together, turning the forest floor into a sea of gray and blue. The air was getting colder. The day was ending. He picked up his spear and turned back toward his shelter. He walked slowly, retracing his steps. He felt grateful. Grateful for the berries. Grateful for the nuts. Grateful for the silence. He reached his fallen oak tree. It looked even more inviting now in the dim light. It was a dark mouth waiting to swallow him up and keep him safe. He crawled back inside. He curled up on his bear cloak. He could still taste the sweetness of the berries on his tongue. It was the taste of freedom. He lay there, listening to the forest settle down for the night. The birds were quieting. The wind was softening. The world was preparing to sleep. And for the first time in years, he was ready to sleep with it. The blue of the twilight deepened into a heavy, velvety violet. The details of the forest began to blur. The trees lost their individual shapes and merged into a single protective wall of darkness. With the darkness came the cold. It crept out from the ground, rising like a silent tide. It nibbled at his fingers and brushed against his cheeks. He sat in the entrance of his shelter, watching the day disappear. He felt the chill settling into his bones. The bear cloak was warm, but the night would be long, and the frost would be hard. He needed heat. He needed a companion that would push back the dark. He crawled out of the hollow oak one more time. He moved slowly, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He did not need to go far. The forest floor was generous. It offered up its bones to him. He bent down and picked up a fallen branch. It was pine, dry and brittle. He snapped it in his hands. Crack. The sound was crisp. It was the sound of good fuel. He placed the pieces in a small pile near the mouth of his shelter. He moved in a small circle, gathering what the trees had dropped. He found a handful of birch bark, peeling from a trunk like thin sheets of paper. It was silvery and soft, perfect for catching a spark. He found small twigs no thicker than his finger. He found heavier logs seasoned by the wind and the sun. He worked methodically. There was no rush. The gathering was a dance. Bend, lift, break, stack. When he had enough wood to last the night, he sat down before his small pile. He arranged the stones in a circle, clearing away the damp leaves to expose the bare earth. He was building an altar to the light. He took the birch bark and shredded it into a small nest of fibers. He placed it in the center of the stone circle. He built a small tent of twigs over it, leaning them against each other with care. Structure, balance, patience. He reached into the leather pouch tied to his belt. His fingers closed around the firestones, 2 pieces of flint, cool and smooth. He had carried them from the tribe, but the fire they would make tonight would be his own. He held the stones close to the tinder. He took a breath. He focused. Strike. A sharp metallic click echoed in the quiet. A tiny orange spark jumped from the stone, living for a fraction of a second before dying in the air. He struck again. Click. Another spark. This one landed on the birch bark, glowing like a tiny red eye, but it faded. He did not get frustrated. He settled into the rhythm. It was a conversation between the stone and the wood. Click, click, click. And then it happened. A spark landed deep in the nest of fibers. It did not die. It held a tiny point of heat, a microscopic star. He leaned forward, his face inches from the ground. He pursed his lips and blew, gently. A soft, steady stream of air. The red dot brightened. It turned orange. Smoke, thin and white, began to curl up, smelling of burnt wood. He blew again, long, slow, encouraging the life inside the tinder. The smoke grew thicker. The orange glow spread, eating the fibers. And then, with a soft whoosh, a small yellow flame burst into existence. It was fragile. It danced and flickered in the slight breeze, hungry and weak. He quickly fed it. He placed the smallest twigs onto the flame, one by one. The fire accepted them. It wrapped around them, growing taller, growing stronger. The yellow turned to gold. The gold turned to red. The crackling sound began. Snap, pop, hiss. The language of fire. He added larger sticks. The flame stabilized. It was no longer struggling. It was established. It cast a circle of warm, flickering light around him, pushing the violet darkness back. The shadows of the trees danced on the ground, moving to the rhythm of the flames. He sat back on his heels and held his hands out to the warmth. The heat washed over his palms, traveling up his arms, melting the stiffness in his shoulders. It was a physical relief. It was a hug from the universe. He watched the fire. It was mesmerizing. The colors shifted and changed every second. Blue at the base, orange in the middle, yellow at the tips. It was the only moving thing in the still forest. This fire was different from the great fire of the tribe. That fire was a monster. It was huge and roaring, demanding constant feeding, surrounded by loud voices and arguments. This fire was small. It was intimate. It was quiet. It crackled softly, like a whisper. It was a secret between him and the night. He turned and crawled back into his shelter, dragging his bear cloak with him. He lay down on the bed of leaves facing the opening. From here, he could see his little fire burning bravely just a few feet away. The heat radiated into his nook, warming the air, making it cozy. He felt a profound sense of safety. The darkness was out there, yes. The cold was out there, but here, in this small circle of light, he was king. He had water in his belly. He had food in his blood. He had a roof of wood and a wall of fire. He watched the flames lick at the logs. His eyelids grew heavy. The hypnotic dance of the light was pulling him down toward sleep. The sound of the fire mixed with the sound of the wind in the trees, creating a lullaby. He was the first rebel. And tonight, he had conquered the cold. He let his head rest on his arm. He watched the fire until his vision blurred. The world was warm. The world was quiet. The world was good. The fire had settled into a steady, glowing bed of coals. The flames were lower now, no longer dancing frantically, but pulsing with a calm, rhythmic heat. He lay on his side in the hollow of the oak tree, his eyes tracing the patterns of the bark above his head. It was a natural roof, solid and thick, smelling of old wood and earth. Outside the small circle of firelight, the forest was changing again. The wind had died down completely. The trees stood motionless, like statues holding their breath. The air grew heavy. It felt charged, thick with moisture. The smell of the earth became stronger, rising up to meet him. It was the scent of wet stone and damp pine needles. Then he heard it. Tap. A single drop falling on a dry leaf somewhere nearby. Tap. Tap. 2 more. Gentle, tentative, like fingers tapping on a drum. Then, a soft sigh passed through the canopy above. The leaves rustled, turning their palms upward. The rain had arrived. It did not come as a storm. It did not come with thunder or fury. It came as a blanket. A slow, steady drizzle that washed over the world. The sound grew from a few isolated taps into a continuous, soothing hiss. Hush. It was the sound of the forest being cleansed. He watched from the safety of his shelter. He saw the raindrops falling through the firelight, looking like streaks of liquid silver. They hit the ground with soft splashes. They hit the stones. They hit the logs of his fire. Hiss. Snap. The fire complained softly as the drops touched it. But it did not go out. It was too hot, too established. The rain only made the warmth feel more precious. The contrast was delicious. Out there, inches away, the world was wet and cold. In here, wrapped in his bear cloak, sheltered by the oak, he was dry and warm. He pulled the fur tighter around his shoulders. He felt a deep, primitive satisfaction. This was the feeling every animal sought. The feeling of being tucked away while the elements moved outside. It was a feeling of total security. He listened to the symphony of the rain. It was complex. There was the deep, dull thud of drops hitting the moss. There was the sharp, tinny sound of drops hitting the rocks. There was the soft, papery sound of drops hitting the dead leaves. It was white noise, a wall of sound that blocked out everything else. It blocked out the memory of the tribe. It blocked out the worries of tomorrow. There was only this moment, this rain, this fire. He shifted his legs, finding a softer spot in the pile of leaves beneath him. His body was heavy. The tension that he had carried in his muscles for years was melting away. He realized that for the first time in his life, he was not waiting for anything. He was not waiting for a command. He was not waiting for a signal. He was simply being. He watched a small stream of water begin to form on the edge of his log roof. It gathered, grew heavy, and then fell. Drip, drip, drip. It formed a tiny puddle near the entrance of his den. He watched the ripples spread out in the puddle, reflecting the orange glow of the embers. The rain seemed to bring the sky down closer to the earth. It created a small, intimate world. The vast forest felt smaller now, reduced to just this tree and this fire. It was cozy. It was a cradle. He closed his eyes for a moment. letting his hearing take over completely. The sound of the rain was hypnotic. It was a rhythm that matched the beating of his own heart. Slow, steady, constant. He thought about the others back in the cave. They would be huddled together, complaining about the dampness, the smell of wet fur filling the air, the noise of too many people trying to get comfortable. But here, the rain was not a nuisance. It was a gift. It was a curtain of privacy. He opened his eyes slowly. The fire was burning down, turning into a pile of shimmering rubies. The heat was gentler now, a soft radiation that kept the chill at bay. He reached out a hand and tossed one last piece of wood onto the coals. It was a small offering. The fire accepted it, licking around the bark, sending up a thin trail of smoke that mixed with the rain. He breathed in. The air was cool and incredibly fresh. It tasted of water and ozone. It cleared his head. He felt a heaviness in his eyelids that was impossible to resist. It was not just tiredness. It was a surrender. The day had been long. The walk had been hard. The river had been cold. But now, the work was done. The shelter was built. The fire was lit. The belly was full. The rain was falling. There was nothing left to do but sleep. He rested his head on his arm. The bear fur was soft against his cheek. He looked at the fire one last time. It was a faithful companion. It would watch over him while he traveled into the land of dreams. The sound of the rain seemed to wrap around him like a heavy blanket. Pat, pat, pat. Hush! It smoothed out his thoughts. It quieted his mind. He felt himself sinking into the leaves, sinking into the earth, sinking into the silence. He was the first rebel, and his rebellion was this peace. His rebellion was this dry, warm sleep in the middle of the wet, wild woods. He let out a long, slow breath. His eyes closed and did not open again. The rain continued to fall, guarding his rest, washing the world clean for tomorrow. The fire was now a bed of glowing coals. The flames had retreated, leaving behind a mound of intense, pulsing heat. It looked like the heart of the earth laid bare on the forest floor. Every now and then, a small breath of wind would pass over the embers, and they would brighten, shifting from a deep crimson to a blinding orange before fading back to red. It was a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Brighten, fade, brighten, fade. He lay perfectly still. His eyes were half closed, watching this dance of light. The shadows in his shelter had softened. They were no longer sharp shapes jumping on the walls. They were gentle waves of darkness that rocked back and forth. Outside, the rain had settled into a steady, quiet drizzle. It was no longer a distinct tapping. It was a continuous hum. It was the sound of the world wrapping itself in a blanket of mist. It created a wall between him and the rest of the universe. Behind that wall of rain, the tribe did not exist. The demands of the elders did not exist. The noise of the camp did not exist. There was only this hollow in the tree, this warmth, and this peace. He felt the weight of his own body sinking into the earth. It was a good weight. In the tribe, he had always held himself tight, his muscles tense, ready for a conflict or a command. But here, the ground accepted him completely. The dry leaves beneath the bear fur shaped themselves to his form. The wood of the tree trunk supported his back. He felt held. He brought his attention to his feet. They were warm inside his boots. The leather was soft, and the heat from the coals reached them gently. He felt the tension leaving his toes, his arches, his ankles. They felt heavy and loose. He moved his attention up to his legs. The long muscles that had carried him over the rocks and through the river were finally at rest. They throbbed slightly, a dull, pleasant echo of the day's journey. He imagined the knots in the muscles untying one by one, smoothing out like water flowing over stone. His hands rested on his chest, rising and falling with each breath. His fingers were curled loosely, holding nothing. For so long his hands had always been busy, holding a spear, holding a tool, holding a piece of meat. Now they were empty, and in that emptiness there was freedom. He took a deep breath in through his nose. The air was warm from the fire, mixed with the cool dampness of the rain. It filled his lungs, expanding his chest. He held it for a heartbeat, savoring the stillness. Then he exhaled, a long, slow sigh that seemed to carry the last of his thoughts away. Inhale. Peace. Exhale. Release. He looked at the embers again. They were growing dimmer at the edges, turning into gray ash, but the center remained hot and bright. It was like his own spirit. The outer layers, the rules, the fears, the noise were turning to ash. But the core, the part of him that was wild and free, was burning bright. He realized that he was not just sleeping. He was healing. The silence was knitting him back together. His eyelids felt incredibly heavy now. It was a struggle to keep them open, and he wondered why he was fighting it. There was nothing to watch anymore. The show was over. The fire would keep him warm until morning. The tree would keep him dry. He allowed his eyes to close. The darkness behind his eyelids was not empty. It was a rich, velvety space. It was a canvas where he could paint his dreams. He saw the flash of the silver river. He saw the green of the ferns. He saw the blue of the twilight sky. These images drifted past him like leaves on a stream, slow and lazy. He felt a wave of warmth wash over him, starting from his chest and spreading out to his fingertips and toes. It was the sensation of total surrender, the sensation of trust. He trusted the forest. He trusted the night. The sound of the rain seemed to move closer, wrapping around his head like a soft hood. It muffled the world. It whispered to him, "Sleep now. Sleep now. You are safe." His breathing slowed down even more. It became deep and rhythmic, matching the slow pulse of the dying coals. He was no longer a man in a forest. He was part of the forest. He was a stone. He was a root. He was a shadow. He drifted on the edge of consciousness. Thoughts tried to form, but they were too heavy, too slow. They dissolved before they could take shape. Tomorrow. The thought came, but it faded instantly. Later. Another thought came, but it too vanished. There was only now, and now was warm. Now was quiet. Now was sleep. He sank deeper, past the tiredness, past the relaxation, into the deep, dark waters of rest. The first rebel had finally found his cause, and his cause was this perfect, unbroken silence. He let go, completely, and the night took him. Here is chapter 9. This chapter describes the deepest part of the night, where the rain eventually stops, leaving behind a profound, absolute silence that confirms his decision to leave the noisy tribe. Time lost its meaning. There was no sun to mark the hours, no shadows to measure the passing of the day. There was only the depth of the night. He was no longer a man lying in a hollow tree. He was a seed buried deep in the earth, waiting, resting, existing in a state of suspended animation. His breathing was so shallow, so quiet, that it was indistinguishable from the air itself. His heart beat slowly, a steady, powerful drum echoing the rhythm of the mountain. Thump, thump, thump. It was the only clock that mattered. Outside the shelter, the world began to shift again. The rain, which had been his guardian, began to tire. The steady drumming on the leaves slowed down. It became a patter, then a drizzle, then a few scattered drops falling from the high branches, and then it stopped. The clouds above, having emptied their burden, began to drift apart. They tore open like wet cotton, revealing the vast velvet depth of the sky behind them. With the rain gone, a new presence filled the forest. It was the presence he had come here to find. The silence. It was not just the absence of noise. It was a physical weight. It was heavy and thick, settling over the trees, the rocks, and the sleeping man. It was the silence of the beginning of the world. Before voices, before tools, before the clash of stone on stone. In his sleep, he sensed this change. The white noise of the rain was gone, replaced by a stillness so complete it felt sacred. He did not wake up, but his spirit settled deeper. In the tribe, the night was never truly quiet. There was always a cough, a snore, a cry, the shifting of a guard. The night was always restless, but here, the night was a statue. The fire had burned down to gray ash. The red glow was gone, hidden deep inside the pile, keeping a tiny, secret pocket of warmth alive. But the air in the shelter remained comfortable. The heat of the day, trapped by the earth and the wood, lingered. The bear cloak trapped his own body heat, creating a perfect microclimate. He slept without moving. He did not toss or turn. There were no bad dreams here. The anxiety of the group, the fear of judgment, the need to please, could not follow him into these woods. Those fears belonged to the noise. Here, in the silence, there was no judgment. The trees did not care if he was strong or weak. The wind did not care if he was brave or afraid. They simply let him be. This acceptance allowed his mind to travel to places it had never gone before. In his deep sleep, he felt a connection to the roots of the oak tree that cradled him. He felt the slow upward pull of the sap. He felt the stability of the ground. He was remembering what it was like to be an animal, stripped of the complications of being human. A single owl called out from far away. Hoo, hoo. It was soft, mournful, and beautiful. It did not break the silence. It decorated it. It was a reminder that he was not the only one awake in the spirit, even while his body slept. The moon, which had been hidden by the storm, finally broke through the gaps in the canopy. A shaft of pale silver light filtered down through the branches. It landed on the forest floor, illuminating the wet leaves, turning them into pools of quicksilver. The light crept closer to his shelter. It touched the tip of his boot. It moved slowly up the bare fur. It was a gentle touch, a silent blessing from the night sky. He was the first rebel, and this was his kingdom, a kingdom of shadows and silver light. He had traded the safety of the crowd for the truth of the solitude. And in this deep, dreamless hour of the night, the trade was worth it. He lay there, a speck of life in the vast, breathing wilderness. He was small, yet he was infinite. He was alone, yet he was whole. The silence held him, protected him, and carried him through the darkest part of the night toward the promise of a new dawn. He stirred. It was not a noise that woke him, but a feeling, a sense that the world outside had changed again. He opened his eyes. The darkness in the shelter was absolute, but the opening of the hollow oak was framed in a strange, ghostly light. He lay there for a moment, letting his senses calibrate. The air was colder now. The dampness of the rain had frozen into a crisp, sharp frost. He could feel it on the tip of his nose. He could feel it waiting just beyond the warmth of his fur cloak. He sat up slowly. The bear fur slid from his shoulders, and the chill bit at his skin, waking him fully. He felt a pull, a need to see what lay beyond his roof. He crawled to the entrance of his den. He pushed himself out into the open air and stood up. The sight that greeted him stopped his breath in his throat. The clouds had vanished completely. Scoured away by the wind, they had left behind a sky so clear, so deep, and so black that it looked like deep water. And floating in that water were the stars. Thousands of them, millions of them. In the valley of the tribe, the smoke from the great fires always hung low, blurring the view. The light of the camp pushed the stars away, but here there was no smoke. There was no false light. There was only the raw, naked universe. They hung above the forest like crushed diamonds thrown onto black velvet. Some were large and steady, burning with a fierce white light. Others were tiny, faint pinpricks that shimmered and vanished if he looked at them too directly. Together they formed a river of light that arched across the heavens. The backbone of the night. He tilted his head back, looking up until his neck ached. He felt a sudden wave of dizziness. The sky was so big and he was so small. It felt as if he could fall upwards, as if gravity might let go, and he would float up into that endless sea of stars. He wrapped his arms around himself, hugging his chest against the cold. He looked at the patterns. He saw the hunter. He saw the great bear. He saw shapes that his ancestors had named 1,000 years ago. They were the silent watchers. They had looked down on his father. They had looked down on his father's father. And now they looked down on him. But for the first time, he did not feel judged. The stars were indifferent. They did not care if he was with the tribe or alone in the woods. They simply burned. They simply existed. He realized then the smallness of his problems. The arguments of the elders, the rules of the camp, the noise of the people. How tiny it all seemed under this canopy of light. The tribe thought they were the center of the world. But standing here, beneath the crushing weight of infinity, he knew the truth. They were just dust. He was just dust. And this thought was not frightening. It was liberating. If he was just dust, then he was free to float. He was free to be whatever he wanted to be. He did not have to carry the weight of tradition. The stars did not demand it. He took a deep breath. The air was ice cold, filling his lungs with the taste of the cosmos. He felt clean. He felt purified. He looked down at his own hands. In the starlight, they looked pale and silver. He looked at the trees. They were black silhouettes, reaching up as if trying to catch the falling light. Everything was silent. The birds were asleep. The wind was still. Even the river sounded far away, a distant memory of sound. He stood there for a long time, drinking in the view. He was storing this moment in his soul. He knew that tomorrow, the sun would rise, and the world would become ordinary again. But for now, in this magic hour, the world was a miracle. He felt the cold beginning to win against his body heat. A shiver ran down his spine. It was time to return. He looked up one last time. He selected a single bright star hanging low above the tree line. He nodded to it. A silent pact between the rebel and the sky. I see you, he thought, and you see me. We are both alone, and we are both burning. He dropped to his hands and knees. He crawled back into the dark warmth of the hollow oak. The smell of the earth and the bear fur welcomed him back. It felt even warmer now after the bite of the frost. He curled up again, pulling the cloak over his head. He closed his eyes. But the image of the stars remained burned onto his retinas. He could still see them, swirling and shining in the dark. He felt a deep, profound peace settling over him. He had seen the roof of the world. He had seen the true size of things. He was safe. He was small. He was free. His breathing slowed down again. The interruption of waking had only made the return to sleep sweeter. He sank back into the leaves, drifting away, floating up to join the silent, spinning stars in his dreams. He lay in the darkness, but the image of the stars still glowed in his mind. Their cold, silent light had washed away the last lingering thoughts of the day. Now there was only the physical reality of his body and the earth. He felt a heaviness returning to his limbs. It was not the sharp, aching tiredness of the hike. It was a soft, liquid weight. It felt as though his bones were turning into lead, sinking deeper and deeper into the mattress of dry leaves. He became aware of his breath. It was slow and shallow. In, out. The air moved through him like a gentle tide. With every exhale, he felt himself becoming heavier. He focused on his face. The muscles around his eyes, which had squinted against the sun and the smoke, softened. The tension in his jaw, held tight for so many years of silence and suppression, finally let go. His mouth fell slightly open. His tongue rested on the floor of his mouth. The mask he wore for the tribe, the mask of the obedient hunter, dissolved. Here, in the dark, his face was just a face. Open, relaxed, truthful. He felt the relaxation travel down his neck. It flowed like warm oil into his shoulders. His shoulders dropped away from his ears. The invisible burden he had carried, the expectations, the rules, the guilt, slipped off. It rolled off his back and disappeared into the shadows. He was light. He felt the warmth of the bear cloak pressing against his chest. Beneath it, his heart beat with a slow, steady rhythm. Thump, 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 thump. It was a calm drum. It was not racing with fear. It was not racing with anger. It was simply keeping time with the universe. The sensation moved down his arms, his biceps, his forearms, his wrists. They felt heavy and useless in the most wonderful way. He could not lift a hand if he wanted to, and he did not want to. His fingers were curled in a loose, soft grip. They were done grasping. They were done working. They were resting. He felt his spine, vertebra by vertebra, settling into the earth. The ground pushed up to support him. It was solid. It was unmoving. It told him, "You can let go. I will hold you." The heaviness flowed into his hips, into his thighs. The great muscles that had powered him away from the camp, away from the noise, now went dormant. They turned off one by one. The tension melted into the leaves, down to his knees, down to his calves, down to his ankles. Even his feet, tired and worn, felt the relief. The throbbing stopped. The cold was gone. There was only a dull, comfortable warmth. He was a single, heavy object. He was a stone at the bottom of a deep, quiet lake. The water of sleep was pressing down on him from all sides, holding him still. His mind tried to drift back to the tribe for a split second. A fleeting image of a face, a snippet of a voice, but it was too far away. It was like looking at a fire on a distant mountain. It could not burn him anymore. It could not warm him anymore. It was just a memory. The silence of the forest moved closer. It filled his ears. It filled his head. It was a thick, soft cotton that blocked out everything. He felt a deep, overwhelming gratitude for this body. It had carried him to freedom. And now he would give it the only reward it asked for. Rest. His eyelids were sealed shut. Even if he wanted to open them, he couldn't. The glue of sleep was too strong. The darkness was too inviting. He took one more conscious breath. He felt the cool air hit the back of his throat. He felt the warm air leave his lips. "Let go," the forest whispered. "Let go," the wind whispered. "Let go," his own heart whispered. And he did. He let go of the last thread of control. He stopped being the watcher. He stopped being the rebel. He became the sleeper. The boundary between his body and the earth blurred. He was no longer on the ground. He was part of the ground. He was rooting down, deep, deep down, into the black, quiet, nourishing dark. The fire had finally released its last visible light. The coals were buried under a blanket of soft gray ash, holding their heat deep inside, like a secret. The darkness in the hollow oak was now complete. It was a gentle, absolute blackness that covered everything like a heavy velvet cloth. He was no longer awake. The transition had happened without him knowing. One moment he was listening to the wind, the next he was floating on it. His breathing had found the perfect rhythm of the night. In and out. It was the sound of the ocean far away. It was the sound of the wind in the high grass. It was a rhythm that had no beginning and no end. The forest around him continued its slow, silent work. The trees drank from the wet earth. The mushrooms grew in the dark. The stars spun slowly overhead. But he was no longer a witness to it. He was part of it. He was just another quiet thing in a quiet world. His dreams were not of the tribe. They were not of the hunt. They were abstract and peaceful. He dreamed of colors, deep blues, soft grays, warm browns. He dreamed of floating in the clear, cold river, but he was not wet and he was not cold. He was weightless. The current was carrying him gently, supporting him, taking him exactly where he needed to go. There was no resistance. There was no fighting upstream. He was simply flowing. The bear cloak held him. The leaves held him. The earth held him. He was safe in the arms of the wild.
From an educational perspective, this story reflects a very real human pattern. Anthropologists and psychologists agree that early humans depended on groups for survival, but they also required solitude for observation, creativity, and decision-making. Silence was not weakness, it was a cognitive space where awareness sharpened and identity formed. Even today, moments of intentional solitude help the human nervous system reset, reduce mental noise, and restore clarity. This story is not about rejecting people, but about understanding why. The human mind occasionally needs distance in order to function well. So, his mind was a calm lake. The ripples had settled. The surface was smooth as glass. There were no thoughts to disturb the water, no worries to cast a stone, just stillness, deep, quiet, still.
He slept the sleep of the mountains, unmoving, ancient. He slept the sleep of the stones, solid, grounded. He slept the sleep of the first men, pure, instinctive, free. The night stretched out before him, endless and welcoming. It would guard him until the sun returned. But for now, the sun was far away. For now, there was only the comfort of the dark. He drifted down, deeper and deeper, into the soft, warm nothingness. The first rebel slept. The woods slept. And you are safe to sleep too. Rest now. Let go. Good night.